Britain still has a very intense class system, and a lot of people in Britain, they really root for somebody who can break through the class system. Over in America, your class system
Mm,
is far less than it is in Britain. I know some people watching may say, oh, no, no, we've got a class system here over in America. But no, in Britain, in many
yeah.
ways, we're still back hundreds of years ago. We still got rich people with crowns and gowns walking around with a staff made of gold and doing stupid rituals. And I'm not a royalist myself. We've
Yeah.
still got all that stuff. If you go to the high courts in London, it's like going back 300 years in time. It's weird.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned the class system in Britain because I've done a fair bit of travel. I think you listened to me talk a little bit about that on an interview I did with somebody else. And I've spent a bit of time I've been to the UK. I've driven from Land's End up to John O'Groats. I've done that whole drive, and I spent a bit of time in New Zealand as well. And one of the things that I think Americans don't really understand about the countries of the former British Empire is just how powerfully the class system still exists, just how powerfully the memory of being subject to the royal family still exists, even if you're not a royalist. England and let's see, in New Zealand and Australia, there's still this feeling of there's a royal family that has some weight, even if we don't want it to. And that is so different from who we are in America, where the class system obviously still exists, but the whole purpose of America, particularly the American middle class, was to be able to destroy the class system, was to be able to move freely up and down the class ladders, generationally. And that doesn't exist in the UK. It doesn't exist hardly anywhere on earth, actually.
Yeah, quite true. Yeah, it's. I mean, if I wasn't a parent here, I would consider coming over to America because I mean, yeah, I mean, a lot of my
Hmm.
fan base for my videos are in America. Yeah, you guys are so open-minded over there.
Yeah.
It's really surprising. Like here in Britain, I can go around Britain, and the attitudes from different people from different parts of the country towards each other are just horrible at times. Just based on the accent. Um, your accent says a lot in Britain. There's certain parts of Britain,
Mm.
if I go to, as soon as they hear my accent, which is a Scouse accent, Liverpool, in America, everybody says, oh, you sound like the Beatles, It's like, yeah, that's because everybody in this city sounds like the Beatles. But that accent, if you hear it anywhere else in Britain, a lot of people get really negative about you. Some of them will be hostile. Some of them will just back off because they're scared of you because people in this city have sort of got a reputation for being very violent. And I don't think I come across as a violent guy at all. But like when
No.
I lived in Manchester for 9 months many years back, and I was surprised how people would back off as soon as they heard the accent. Whoa, can't trust this guy. I mean, there's a reputation for theft as well. There was some TV shows back in the 80s that spread the sort of idea around the country that everybody who lives in Liverpool is a thief who steals off you. There was a TV show that was set in Liverpool called The Boys from the Black Stuff, and it showed some of the really rough people in the city. It was a good show. But the characters in it were some of them they were thieves. They just steal anything, and shows like that on TV just got this city a terrible reputation. And yeah, that reputation still lasts until today. There's places where they say, "Oh, Scousers are thieves. The Scousers are violent. They're crazy, or they're just thick." And I've always found it very funny. If I go to other places in Britain, I meet people who've got a very posh Queen's English accent, and I go and talk to them in my accent. And at first, they're like, whoa. And then as I get talking to them and I meet them on their own intellectual level, and I present them with a few ideas that they might not have thought of before, there's this look of confusion. It's like, am I hearing this from a Scouser? You know, I didn't know there were intelligent people in Liverpool, So things like that can be quite funny. But yeah, just like the accents alone is like a class system itself in Britain. You are a lower life form if you've got a Scouse accent, an Irish accent, a Scottish accent, and there's several other accents that are held as lower. But if you're in London and you've got that proper Queen's English accent, then you're automatically a higher being, And it's even to the point where there are certain accents that are avoided on TV chat shows and news presentations, things like that. So news reporters will never have a Scouse accent in Britain. They might if it's a local TV station, but you would never get a Scouser presenting the news on a London-based TV show. You know.
What's so interesting about that, you think of like Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, founder and CEO of Facebook. For years, in fact, I think he still does. He wore just simple jeans and a hoodie. So he was one of the richest men in America, maybe one of the richest men in the world. But in the United States, there's like almost like class shame in some corners. There are some corners where obviously they don't, but where people will try to hide. And this is absolutely true in Silicon Valley. People will actively try to hide in certain ways the class that they're in, versus in England, you can't. Like it's written on the way that you speak, and you're judged for it. I just don't think Americans can understand. Maybe people from the South can kind of understand, like if you have a really thick Mississippi
Yeah.
or Alabama accent, something like that. But I don't think we have an analog for that here in the States.
Yeah, there are some elements to that, yeah, from what I recall in the States. I mean, well, actually, one that sprung to mind as you were talking about there was Clarice Starling in Silence of the Lambs, where Hannibal
Oh,
Lecter points out and he says, "You've tried to shed that accent, pure West Virginia." It's like, oh, okay,
yeah.
she's from the lower classes there, yeah. So I guess you guys have got it there as well, but the accent thing is pervasive across Britain.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of Americans, well, I don't know. I'm from Arizona, and being from Phoenix, we don't really have an accent. We don't have a noticeable one. I can kind of pick one up, but it's not something that would compare to like a Southern California accent or a Texas accent or New York or something like that. But I just think that there are realities between, like, you and me would look very similar, like on the surface, white guys, etc., speaking the same language of English. But the United States and Britain are two very different countries. Even though we have a shared common past, it's almost like we're mysteries to each other in certain ways. Do you feel that, because you interact with so much American content, American movies that are made for American audiences that don't that do they reflect a slightly different reality in Britain, or is it sort of, I guess I'd imagine it'd be universal in its own way?
Well, this is I'm quite unusual in this respect because I may have mentioned it in the previous podcast. I can't remember, but I lived in Canada for 5 years when I was a kid. So I was
Hmm.
7 years old when we went over there and 12 years old when we came back. So a large part of my formative years was in Canada. And from the British point of view, Canada is just an extension of the United States. You know, it's culturally very
Ah.
similar. The accents are very similar. Almost to British people, we can't tell the difference between a Canadian accent and a United States accent, if there is much difference. I think there's a lot more
Hmm.
variation within the United States of accents than there is in Canada. Um, but yeah, so I have always felt a connection to North America because of that stuff. I mean, all the movies in Canada were all from the United States. You know, they didn't really have much film industry of their own, and so much of the culture crossed over between the two countries. So there's always been a part of me that feels North American because of those 5 years, and still to this day when I'm reading a book to myself, I often still hear in a Canadian accent as I'm talking to myself in the book, reading the book to myself.
Hmm.
Still, I'm 52 now, and it's like, wow, that is still there. So that, in a way, that kind of helped me break out of a lot of the class system conditioning and other types of conditioning here in Liverpool and in Britain, because I'd experienced 5 years in Canada with it in a society that's a lot less bigoted, a lot more free, a lot more. It doesn't matter where you're born or what stock you come from. It's what you can do and what you can achieve and what you've got to offer that counts. That was what I experienced as being the North American way. So I came back to Britain and that stuck with me. And I was disinterested in any efforts from anybody here in Britain to say, oh, you belong in this social box. I was like, no, no, not
Hmm.
to that, you know. So that's helped me a lot. But I think a lot of people in Britain have a preoccupation with movies from the United States and this probably applies with a lot of countries across the world, because we want the kind of free sort of openness that we associate with American society. I know it's not all like that in America,
No.
um, but but from what we see in the movies, I mean, you could say it's America has sold itself very well to the world on that front. But you know, we see these movies set in suburbia in America where everybody's got a huge house and a gigantic garden, whereas here in Britain, like where I live, a lot of the houses are just crammed next to each other with no garden space in between them. They're called terraced houses, and they're like chicken coops. You know, it's like everybody's just
Mhm.
condensed in together. I never saw any houses like that when I was in Canada. Everywhere I went, every house was at least semi-detached, or if not fully detached, and everybody had a garden. And to me, that was a different world. And after we moved back to Britain, I forever continued to long for the open space of Canada, or the United States. I like the way things are so spread out there. The streets aren't crammed. Like you get streets here where there's a road and it's such a small, thin road. There's a load of cars parked, and as you're driving down that road, you're swerving in and out of the parked cars. I never saw any of that in Canada. Huge open roads, big sidewalks with plenty of room. There's just so much space. Still to this day, I get this claustrophobic feel of crammed in, a sensation of being crammed in Britain, like I'm stuck in a sardine can, you know. Sorry, we were
Mhm.
supposed to be talking religion, and I've gone off on this mad tangent here. Sorry.